Welcome back to Inside the Pastor Study Podcast. I'm Pastor Jeremy.
And I'm Pastor George.
And it is Easter week.
Wow.
Yeah, big week here for us. We, the ongoing saga of the renovation, right? Everything looks amazing.
Beautiful.
So many people working so hard on this project here at the church. And now we just wait for chairs to arrive.
Right, which I just heard are probably not going to arrive.
That's what it looks like. Yeah, they're supposed to ship today.
Well, yeah, but I just heard that
There's
they
no
wanted to be
tracking
paid
information
for today.
They
wanted to be paid before they ship.
Oh.
Oh.
I mean, I get that. We didn't do that?
I do too. Well, I guess it's just the continuing saga of the renovation.
Yeah.
So
This is a thing we could start probably even jump into off the outset, right?
Oh, sure.
Like, I have felt this may be a contributing factor to some of the stress I'm feeling in my life, which is another topic we might get to.
We might get to there.
But in this process, like, we have had an amazing team of people piloting this project.
Exactly.
And I am not as involved in this project as I feel like I typically would be.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I am lacking a lot of the control that I would like to have.
So we both come from very Baptist backgrounds. Here we are in a community church, and it's very much, I'm not going to say it is congregationally driven.
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of, but it's really driven by, we have an elder team. We put the decisions in the hands of a few decision makers who aren't necessarily us.
Right.
And let them operate. And, great things come from that. But because we come from this Baptist background where you think
everything has to come across my desk at some point.
Everything has to come across. Yeah. And it's relaxing in many ways as a senior pastor to not have to deal with the renovation.
Yeah.
And I'll go home and my wife will say to me, "So tell me about the renovation. What is this color? What is that color?" And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. It
don't
feels
know.
weird.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
But it does, there's like this secondary stress because I'm not as involved or in control of the thing, and it feels weird to me. Yeah. Really, really trustworthy, wonderful people who are doing a better job of this than I would be doing.
Absolutely.
But it feels strange.
Yeah.
So, but I think this stuff is coming.
Yeah.
And it'll be fine. And like so many things in life, like the anticipation of it coming creates all of this stress and anxiety. And in like 10 years, you don't even remember it and you take it all for granted.
Absolutely. Just gone.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we'll get into this conversation a little bit later. So there you go. We'll tease that and let you be anxious about it not being here yet.
Yes.
And we'll go into one of my favorite things about the podcast. We're going to go into our theological term of the week.
The theological term of the week.
And this week, we're going to hit another major heresy that we actually missed in the timeline. So not exactly chronological work on our part.
Well, actually, it is.
But,
it's ahead,
you could just place this one wherever you want. Like, so, in your context of early church heresies, this is a biggie.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's today's topic?
Today's theological word is Pelagianism.
Pelagianism.
Right.
That's when you are looking over the shoulder of somebody else and you take their speech and you use that as your own campaign speech.
No. It's Pelagianism is a theological heresy that comes from probably about 500 AD.
Okay, so this is a little bit later than some of the other ones we've been doing.
Yeah, so I mean, you can watch. It's interesting to stand here in 2021 and look back at church history, and there's always been a struggle. There's always been some issue that the church is digging into and trying to work its way through. And so, you get into the early 200s where we were last week, and we're talking about, the nature of how do we know what is truly inspired. And you see, issues like dealing with Marcion, and you deal with, even with Montanism, because you've got that whole idea of, well, I can know because God is still speaking through prophets and prophetesses. And so you have that whole, what do I know and how do I know it thing. And then you get a little later, like 200, 300, and the issue is, okay, what is Jesus? Who is Jesus? And that's the real question that comes into the early church. You get a little later on, and Pelagianism arises because the question is, what do I do with sin, and how am I saved?
So yeah, at this point, we're pretty confident we know the role of Jesus, and we've ironed out a lot of those wrinkles in the Trinity.
Yes.
And so now we're trying to figure out, what does salvation mean, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very much so.
Okay.
Very much so. So onto the world stage, onto the church stage, if you will, arise two individuals who are trying to deal with this concept of salvation and sin, and both, those two concepts, salvation and sin, they're glued together, right? The concept of how I'm saved would be the term soteriology. The concept of what sin is and how sin affects me is something called hamartology. So I can't understand what salvation is until I understand what sin is.
Right, because you need to know what you're being rescued from.
Exactly. And we continue to struggle with this concept of sin. We were talking this morning in the office about teaching in Sunday school, and about sin. And unfortunately, I get into this cringe almost every time I hear the conversation about teaching about sin to children, because what we teach children about sin is, that they're guilty of sin, and that's demonstrated by their own sinful acts.
Right.
But
when we talk about what the sinful acts are,
when you talk about, and they're sinful acts, right? But your 3-year-old is not going to hell because they're disobedient.
They're incredibly disobedient, though.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've had
3-year-olds are fun.
Oh yeah. But so this is crazy. But hear me out, right? Your 3-year-old is not going to hell because they're disobedient. Your 3-year-old's disobedience comes from the fact that all human beings are guilty of Adam's sin.
Yeah, and this is what we figure out here.
Right.
In this particular
heresy.
This
is what this heresy of Pelagianism deals with, and that is, it deals with what sin am I guilty of, and what takes care of it. So Pelagius comes on the scene, and Pelagius offers this. He says, the death of Jesus Christ on the cross covers all of mankind's sin at birth. They are now a clean slate because Jesus Christ died and rose again. His death covers all, so it's almost a universalism, if you will.
Sure, because it doesn't matter if you're from a Judeo-Christian line or if you're that classic deepest, darkest Africa.
Yes.
You grew up a Hindu. Doesn't matter.
Yes.
At birth, according to Pelagius, at birth, original sin has been taken care of already because of Christ's work on the cross, and now you start fresh.
So everybody now starts with a blank slate, and we sin. So now you're not guilty of original sin anymore. That's been taken care of by Jesus. But now you could be guilty of ongoing sin, and that's where confession comes into play, and you need to continuously confess your sin to God so that you can be forgiven, so that you can go to heaven, because you may not go to heaven if you are a sinner, and now you're responsible for your own sins, but you're not responsible for Adam's sin anymore. You are cleaned of that. Everybody's a blank slate. And here's another wrinkle that comes into this calculation. You're living in a culture where infant mortality is probably,
incredibly
5
high.
times higher than what we have.
Yeah.
Right? So you have an ongoing issue from the masses of my 1-month-old just died.
Yeah.
What
do I do with that?
Where do I do with that?
Where are they? Yeah.
Yeah, where are they?
Yeah.
Did my 1-month-old go to hell because they died? Death.
A continuous that question still exists, even with
Sure.
the much more decreased mortality rate among infants. It still exists.
Yeah.
And a lot of
because
us have been touched
death
by
is
that.
a demonstration of the reality of sin.
Right.
Right. Your 1-month-old doesn't die if they aren't accountable for the sin of Adam. So what do I do with my 1-month-old that dies? So Pelagius says, oh, your 1-month-old is basically your 1-month-old is too
covered.
It's covered.
Yeah.
Too young, especially if, and here's this next wrinkle, right? You have affirmed and washed away original sin in baptism. Ooh, but so you've got to rise in paedobaptism.
Sure.
The baptism of children. So on the other side of this argument, so you've got Pelagius who's saying the death of Jesus Christ takes care of universal sin and
now you have a responsibility to be in confession the rest of your life.
to make sure that you are cleansed of your daily sins.
Right.
Right.
How do you do that as like a 3-year-old? And how do you go back and cover those sins from before you knew what you were doing?
See, there are no easy answers,
Okay.
right? There are no easy answers. So,
How could you possibly confess every single sin?
well, and this is my problem. This is our ongoing problem as Protestants with Catholicism, because there's no way we as Protestants approach this whole concept from a 1 John 1:9 concept, that if we confess our sin, Jesus is faithful and just to forgive us our sin and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And that
With
confession,
all being the key word there.
all right.
unrighteousness.
And that
Yeah.
confession is to Christ.
Yeah.
And that Christ cleanses us from our sin, not a priest, not a saint, somebody who's died who is really, really holy or whatever. Jesus is the one who forgives sin, because the work of Jesus Christ is to cleanse men from all sin, not just original sin.
Right.
And that's where
Augustine
jumps into play. Augustine jumps in and he says about Pelagianism, absolutely not. All men are sinners and all men struggle with sin, but the death of Jesus Christ cleanses men from all of their sin.
Yeah.
Augustine is he's an interesting guy, because see, he's a monk, he's a monastic, he's a priest, and he's a writer, but he's also not saved.
I was just going to say, this is another wrinkle in this Pelagianism move, right? Because if you don't come to Christ until you're an adult, again, like, how do you have to? At that point, are you clean and you start with a fresh slate, or do you have to confess all of your sins that you weren't even paying attention to?
Exactly, you have to confess all of that sin that you have to. But there isn't that concept, because nobody in this world is actually coming to Christ as an adult.
Huh.
You've all been ushered into the church, and so therefore your confessions are handled through the church. Your confession is handled through your parents until you are actually of an age to take responsibility for those.
Yeah.
And then you're in the confessional, every week, every month, every year, or whatever.
Right. To try and
take
cleanse
care of
the
it.
slate.
And you also, this is something that I see developing in a lot of Catholics that I have known, and that is, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to go out. Friday is confession. I'm going to go out Wednesday night, and I'm going to get drunk, and I'm going to cheat on my wife and all of that. And Friday, I'll just go to confession and confess it all, and I'll be kosher.
All set. Yeah.
It's all done, right?
Right.
So
it's that, like,
I just
liberty
have to
license
wait.
issue you get in Galatians, right?
I just have to wait between Wednesday and Friday and hope I don't die.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
So
Augustine
Augustine comes at this from an entirely different perspective.
So Augustine's this interesting guy, because, like I said, his early life, he's not saved.
Yeah.
You read, for example, his book City of God, and there's no godliness in Augustine at that point. But a great thing happens to Augustine, which, interestingly enough, the book that he writes after his conversion is called Confessions.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And what Augustine does is he confesses that sin is a reality and we cannot save ourselves, that we are all guilty of original sin, and there's nothing, we're born with it, we continue to have it, it continues to affect our lives, it continues to affect the way we think. He's the original, he goes back to Paul in many ways, but he breaches forward to Martin Luther and to John Calvin.
Yeah.
He's the original guy who says there isn't a freedom of will. We don't have free will from Augustine. Augustine says absolutely not, because in a sense, what Pelagianism does is it does give you free will.
Yeah,
you're
in
no
control.
longer under the bondage of sin. In your birth, you just continue to do. You're free at that point to make whatever choices you want. And Augustine says absolutely not. To the point where Augustine brings Pelagius before the Pope and before a church council. And he says of Pelagius, what Pelagius is preaching is ungodly. And they force Pelagius to recant. And because they're about to ban him as a heretic, he has to recant of all of the doctrines of Pelagianism. He has to agree that to discard his universalism, he has to agree to throw away this whole concept that I'm already forgiven.
Right.
Right. And in return, what the church does is they embrace something that we commonly call it our second heresy. The church commonly, much to Augustine's chagrin, they embrace a doctrine that we would commonly call semi-Pelagianism.
Yeah.
And this is, in many ways, this is still the ongoing doctrine of the Catholic Church, is semi-Pelagianism. So what semi-Pelagianism says is baptism washes away your original sin.
So you wait a week or two, or up to a year, maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah. Well, no. Yeah.
And then you're cleansed.
But it's more along the lines of you have a baby. Mm-hmm. The next thing you do is you baptize your baby.
Right, because then that cleanses the original sin.
Exactly. To the point where, I mean, you get all kinds of almost pharisaical rules out there, like if your baby is born and the baby isn't healthy and I don't have water, can I sprinkle wine on the head of my child and that will wash away their original sin? To which the church says, oh, yeah, absolutely, whatever.
I appreciate a culture where water's not available, but wine is.
Yeah, I mean, so you get into this entire doctrine, and basically you're dealing with the doctrine of paedobaptism, and you're dealing with the doctrine of original sin, and you're dealing with the issue that babies die. What do I do? How do I satisfy the masses? And the masses are satisfied with just
Get them baptized.
Get them baptized, and then if the baby dies, it's all okay.
Yeah.
You've washed away their original sin.
Well, it doesn't really solve miscarriage or other problems like that, does it? But
Well,
at that time frame, that wasn't necessarily the thinking either.
yeah, right.
Interesting.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, and that might be some of the pressure on miscarriage, even to current culture, is that, man, if miscarriage used to be viewed as the ultimate curse of God on your life.
Sure, like prior to...
Exactly,
Yeah.
because you bore a stillborn child, or you lost a child in utero, and that was as though God was saying, I'm cursing you and I'm cursing your child and sending him to hell because they couldn't be baptized. And that's a huge stigma, and it was a huge stigma in our culture. It kind of it gravitates down, and you can even. I mean, it's true that the Anglican Church moved away from semi-Pelagianism, but all of these early Reformation groups, the Paedo-Baptist groups, like the Reformed Church and the Lutheran Church and the Anglican Church and all of these, they still practice Paedo-Baptism, and they'll tell you different stories. Like, the Presbyterian Church will tell you that Paedo-baptism is similar to circumcision.
That's the one I've always heard.
Identifies and makes the child part of the covenant.
Yeah.
And then, covenant children go to heaven is the idea. It's opening up and giving them the opportunity to be a participant in the grace of God, but it doesn't give them the grace of God. Whereas in Catholicism and to some extent in Anglicanism, there's
some close ties there.
Yeah, there's some close ties there. I mean, in Anglicanism, you have the actual birth of the concept of limbo. One of the things that you can kind of pick up in C.S. Lewis is that idea, because Lewis was an Anglican, He believes in limbo. So if your child dies before they can be baptized, they go to an intermediate state. It's not purgatory, because purgatory is designed in Roman Catholicism for everybody, in this middle stage. But limbo is just a level basically for children who die.
And that level keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter until you fall on the floor.
Yeah, right. Usually with torches and way too many pina coladas.
Yeah.
But those babies go to limbo in Anglican doctrine.
Okay.
Because they didn't really know what to do with them, because baptism still has an original sin quotient in even Anglican doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And so those two are together so close, right? Roman Catholicism and Anglicanism, there are a lot of overlaps.
Yeah.
And they're trying to deal with that, what happens to these babies, and what if they don't get baptized? And
Yeah. So our tradition then, which does not practice infant baptism,
right,
just decided to shrug that whole issue and say, we don't know. Let's move on. And
yeah.
how's that? It doesn't really offer a lot of that comfort that some of those other options,
You're not drawing me into the where do dead babies go story, are you?
I mean, it could be a conversation we have at some point here, but it doesn't necessarily. It just kind of restate. I'm fumbling over my words here because it's such a complicated concept. But I think to our credit, our tradition's credit, we try to stay really close to Scripture.
Right.
So we're not inventing things that are extra biblical to answer questions that we don't have, too hard problems.
Right.
Right. And that's always been the Reformers' response to this, right? Like, this isn't in Scripture, so why are we inventing these things?
Yes.
And the answer to why we're inventing these things really is there's a huge need here that needs to be answered.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that need to be cared for.
Right.
Who are
God
hurting.
hasn't answered, except to say this.
Yeah.
Right? Here's what God answers. God says that He is gracious and that He is loving and that He will do what He will do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you know that God doesn't take those precious little ones directly to heaven?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Right.
I mean, you can't know other.
Right. There's no.
Right.
Yeah. So we have to just rely on the character of God. We also can rely on what is the passage in Samuel with at least what David thinks happens.
Right. 2 Samuel 14, I think.
Yeah,
it
when
is.
he loses his son.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's. So I used to say this. I can say with certainty, reliant upon 2 Samuel 14.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I'm going to be controversial so
I
early
roped you into
here.
this. I got you.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I can at least say with a modicum of certainty that the that the babies of believers who die prior to an understanding of the gospel go to heaven. And I say that because when I see people like David, who had a covenant relationship with God and knew God, he could speak with certainty about the relationship that his obedience had in the death of his child.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Can I speak to those who are outside of that realm? Well, I don't really have any evidence.
Yeah, this is all we have.
Okay.
And what we have is thin.
Right? So I don't really have any evidence of that. I don't know where I would go with that. So I kind of agree with the Presbyterians a little bit on that in the covenant concept that, man, your family, your relationship with God doesn't necessarily does, but could, man, I'm seeing the letters come.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They send them right on to you.
They could affect the relationship of that child.
Yeah.
And I think that's, quite honestly, I think that's all the more reason why things like abortion are horrendous, because, how can you commit children? Can you imagine if that was right? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying
Hypothetically,
here's the minimum. The evidence that I have can kind of point to this. I don't know that the evidence that I have points anywhere else, or if I'm just looking too narrowly. I would love to say that every single child who dies before they have an understanding of the grace of God is informed about the grace of God by God, so that they can trust God. But I don't know that. I didn't die when I was a child.
Yeah, there's no way of us knowing the answer to that. Because there's nothing in Scripture that would point to it. There's just hope.
God will do what God will do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you can obviously, here we go. There's a reason why.
You understand why semi-Pelagianism rises. You understand why Pelagianism exists, because there's this need to scratch an itch that every human being has.
Yeah. And I think, we rely on Scripture for this is another deep hole of theology. But when we look at Scripture, we tend to think of Scripture as all-encompassing for all of life's problems. But I think Scripture's role is to inform us who God is.
Yeah.
And that is enough for us to be able to have the essentials we need to find our purpose and role in life, which is to serve and worship our Lord.
Right. And that need word is so key.
And there are things that are real pain points for the human condition that the Bible does not speak to, because that's not its job.
Right.
It's not our textbook for how to live life.
Right.
It's designed to teach us about God and our relationship with Him.
Right.
So there are things like this that are huge issues, that are huge felt needs that we don't have great answers to because that wasn't in God's plan for us to know.
Right. Right.
And that's hard.
Right. And we'll find those solutions in eternity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Whew.
Yeah.
Didn't know I was going to go that deep today.
Yeah. See? Yeah. Now, next week we'll figure out why the Cubs have only won the World Series twice in 150 years, right?
Yeah, because if we can come up with this answer,
yes,
there's got to be others, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's today's theological term of the week.
The theological term of the week.
Feel free to send your letters to
podcast@marshcorner.com. Do not send them to me.
All right. So that was stressful, which is a good segue here into what we're going to talk about today, because this is Holy Week, and this is for people who are in ministry. This is, I don't know, what's more stressful for you? Is it this week or is it Christmas?
It's always Christmas.
Yeah. It's
always Christmas is a month.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
It's a month of crazy. And it's a month of crazy that is it's not just church crazy, it's family crazy, right?
Right.
Because you've got
right.
all of the other things that you have to do for your own family, and coordinate with all of your own family, and then you've got the whole church side of the Christmas thing. But Easter is nasty, just because. I mean, so here at Marsh, we'll do Good Friday and we'll do Easter, and
we don't do the Maundy Thursday thing here.
We don't do the Maundy Thursday, but I know that there are churches that do.
Yeah, it's a cool tradition.
Yeah,
we just kind of combine those two things into Good Friday.
Yeah. I used to be part of a fellowship when I was pastoring in New Jersey, and we would do our home church would do, the church I was pastoring would do a Good Friday service in the evening and an Easter service, and then this local community group, our pastors group, would do a 7 Last Words of Jesus series that would kick off around noon on Good Friday and run until about 3:30, 4 o'clock. And you would have a different pastor preaching on each of those 7. So you had seven like 10 to 15 minute sermons.
Yeah, on each word. On
each word or each phrase throughout the afternoon. And I mean, it was usually really well attended.
Yeah.
But that was just, I would be given a word and it was like, oh man, it's crazy. And then the maybe an added stress was then okay, how do I overlap this so that if the people that are from my church that were at the all afternoon thing, when they come to the Sunday evening or the Friday evening thing, are hearing the same thing but different.
Yeah.
So there's that added pressure.
Yeah, and then there'd be typically nothing on Saturday, and then how many growing up or through the years, how many of your churches have done a sunrise service?
Oh man, almost all of my churches prior to Marsh did a sunrise service. And you say there'd be nothing on Saturday, but my last church had this huge front lawn.
Oh, is that when you did your Easter egg hunt?
Yeah, so we would actually have a community Easter egg hunt on the Saturday as a means of reaching our community, and we would get probably. I remember one time we would always start it out with a gospel presentation using they used to have salvation eggs. Which were really awesome, and then we would put the salvation eggs out with the rest of the eggs for a special prize. But I remember like the first time we did that, I think we had like 500 or 600 kids in our main auditorium, and I think it was probably designed for 250.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at all of these people in there, and they more people came in. I'm looking at it, and I'm like, oh, I hope the fire marshal doesn't show up. And the other thing going through my head is,
hope we have enough eggs.
No. The other thing that was going through my head was, I hope the floor joists hold up. I mean, it was a crowd. It was the most amazing moment, right?
Yeah.
And then we went out, and people were still showing up even after we'd done the main gospel presentation. And we probably had 1,000 kids, and it was a great outreach. Awesome story of outreach that time. We the eggs would go out, and we would tell kids, you had 5 eggs, pick up 5 eggs or whatever, and we had so many kids and so many thousand eggs, and those eggs were scarfed up probably 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Thanksgiving dinner, you spend hours prepping, and 15 minutes later everybody's full.
Yeah.
And it's just like boom, it was gone. So I had this really irate father. I mean, I thought he was going to deck me. Oh, he was so angry. And he came after me, and he says, "You're in charge of this?" And I was like, yeah, I'm the pastor at this church, Sure. And he says, "My son had a disability," and he said, "He tried to get eggs, and before he could grab the eggs, they were all grabbed." And he says, "This is terrible." I said, "Hang on, come with me." Brought he and his the father and the son back into the church, and we had planned on something going wrong, just like this. And we had maybe 150 plastic eggs in a bag that we just held out in reserve. And he said he can pick 5 eggs just like anybody else.
Yeah.
And that dad looked at me like saucers for eyes and just started to weep, and got to talking with him and shared the gospel with him, and he accepted Jesus because of an Easter egg hunt. And and came out that he and his wife were in the process of a divorce. Oh, and it was just a terrible circumstance. And what do I do? My wife wants to see the kids. I don't think she's worthy. He said, "Well," I said, "invite her to church on Sunday. She can see the kids in church with you." And he said, "Okay. I don't know that she'll come." She came every week. She got saved.
Oh man, cool. Yeah.
So look, it was stress. It was crazy stress. And I mean, I thought I was going to get decked, Can you imagine doing Easter Sunday morning with a black eye?
You're doing perfect.
Yeah.
Wearing your aviators.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, the stress is real.
Yeah.
But yeah. And it's not as stressful because we don't have the Easter egg hunt thing. here
Right.
at Marsh.
Right. We do tend to do, again, we have a great team, which changes this, but we usually do a pretty intense thing for Good Friday.
Yes.
And that varies every year. That looks a little bit different, but
Yep.
we try and put a lot of creativity into that. And then Easter Sunday, you have, it's Super Bowl Sunday, right? Like
Yes.
for us in church, right? Like that's the week that you expect your best numbers of the year. That's a chance to share the gospel with people who don't normally come to church. You have friends who are coming for the first time, so there's all these expectations of, your members bringing a friend. They actually did all of that work and going out and inviting people to come to church, which is so hard to do for so many of us. And so there they are, and they're like, there's expectations of like, oh, they're finally into church. I've been talking with them forever. I hope they hear about Jesus, and I hope there's some change. Like, all of this goes into that day.
Yeah.
On top of it just being like a great day of celebration. It's exciting.
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love all of this, and I love the stress of it.
Yeah.
That's been an interesting thing. So I brought this topic up because stress has been something I've been thinking about a lot this week. I had a meeting with somebody earlier in the week, and we were talking about. I was working through some nutrition stuff for some of my races, and just trying to think through that. And I was meeting with a nutritionist and trying to figure out why I was seeing some things in my own life that didn't quite make sense. So we're looking at some of my nutrition things that I'm eating and all of that. And then she asked me, well, how's your stress load? How do you handle stress? My response was like, I enjoy stress. Like, I don't typically, I'm a kind of a laid back person. I typically don't feel this as much. And, it's just, this is kind of, it's there. I know that life is stressful, but it tends to not bother me. And so we met a few weeks later. This was just last week. And she's like, things weren't going the way that we had planned after the original meeting. And so she said, let's talk about this stress thing again. And so I know a lot of people who are so high functioning in stress and who have so much of it around them that what they experience is now normal. And it's not normal. And so then the processing of how to handle it, just you don't do as good of a job, right? And so for me, so she asked me, like, what are some of the ways that you handle stress? And I said, well, it used to be exercise, but I take things to their, I'm this person who takes things a little bit too far. And so now it's a stress creator rather than a stress reliever. And so it sounds like, I think probably just eating a lot is really what my stress relief is. Well, yeah, it's tough. And I think like for a lot of us who are in ministry, I mean, we live in the Northeast, which is like the epicenter of stressed out individuals.
Yes.
And as pastors, we tend to live in a high stress occupation.
Right.
And so it's worth talking about, like, what do we do to handle stress? And then how does somebody in our environment, what do they do to handle their stress? And is there a spiritual component to all of this?
Right. And that's a tough question. Again, I think another aspect is, of course, performance stress. Mm-hmm. You mentioned living here in the Northeast, and it is the stressed out capital of the world. Absolutely. I mean, interestingly enough, I pastored in Southern Ohio, and life was kind of at the bless her heart level. Everybody was like so slow. I mean, it stressed me out that they were so unstressed.
Yes. It does.
And it just, man, it was driving me crazy. And I think that here in the Northeast, it's just the opposite. Everybody's just, there's no time, there's no effort, there's no time, to do something different is to create a new priority, which creates new stresses, and it's just difficult. So it's difficult to pastor up here because people are stressed.
Yeah.
It's difficult to pastor up here because people are so unconcerned about their spiritual lives. So on a performance level, right? If you're pastoring up here and you can get 150 people in your church, you're like, yeah, man, that's great.
We're doing great.
We're doing great, you know? And then you find out about some guy that's got a church of 4,000 in Arkansas, and, he he doesn't even need a staff. It's just one guy with, not quite.
Yeah.
But there's just you look at that and you say, how does that happen? I'm working full out here, and barely keeping my head above water, and bam, down there, and
he plays golf 3 times a week.
exactly.
Yeah. How does this work?
Right?
Yeah.
Right? How does that work? How does that work? So sometimes I think sometimes stress is grandly environmental, not just locally, and not just your issue. It's just kind of the issue of others around you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that there's a performance element to it.
Yeah.
Like, why can't I get?
Sure. And the other piece of that, the people around you, that's for sure a thing. I mean, that I've been trying to track that in the last week or two. I felt incredibly stressed out. But when I look at my actual workload that's on my plate at the moment, it's not as high as it is at other times of the year. And I'm trying to figure that piece out too. Like, why is it that I am feeling all of this intensity, but there's nothing for me to actually go and do?
Right.
Because, like renovation, that's handled.
Yes.
I'll show up and help move heavy things occasionally, but that's handled.
Yeah.
And all right, so I can't really fix that thing. The services that are coming up, I'm participating in some of those in various ways. But
Yeah.
my part on that's handled.
Yeah.
But everybody else around me is really, really stressed out. And so then there's that piece of like, all right, is there anything I can do to relieve that stress?
Which then becomes a stress because you can't. You're powerless.
I know, right?
You're powerless.
Which is stressful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things you do? What are some of the things that you've built into life that help with your own personal stress relief?
All right. So first and foremost, I'm terrible at this. Okay. I think that I remember one time reading that pastors were hard on life insurance policies because it's one of the highest stressed, most likely to have a heart attack and die professions of any profession out there.
Oh, we should have given a trigger warning to our spouses before we said that.
Yeah, we should have, but that's the way it goes. So there's just a lot of pressure that you just don't understand and you don't really know how to handle. And for me, I think that my best stress relief is prayer. I mean, all right, somebody's out there saying, oh, yeah, just pray about it.
Their eyes are rolling, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, look, here's how stress hits me. Okay, in addition to probably I probably eat a lot when I stress, right? But the key thing that hits me stress-wise is insomnia. I mean, this is a crazy thing, but usually at least once a year, I have a stretch of 4 to 6 days when I don't sleep. Just don't sleep. We've even had some really bad things that have happened because I just don't.
You've been operating on
I've
zero.
been operating at zero sleep, and somebody says something to me, and in an unguarded moment, I say something that I shouldn't because I'm just so exhausted.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I'm now at this point where I know that those things happen. And those turn into 4 to 5 days of just intense, amazing, overwhelming prayer in the middle of the night. When God and I have long, deep conversations about all of the people that are in my life. I just because, the stressors are those folks. And so in prayer, I analyze every single relationship that I have. I will pray through our entire congregational list. And not just God bless John, more along the lines of I'll pray about very specific things that I see in their lives, mostly spiritual, mostly, I want them to mature more, Lord. This is my struggle with this person, is that they should be in a discipling program and they're not. or every time I offer it, God, they don't want it. So I have that conversation with God, and the conversation begins with, here's my stressor, and now I'm going to leave it with you. Here's what I want to see, but I want to see what you want more, and that's that becomes every night for 4 or 5 hours, just working my way through all of my relationships, because I really feel like my greatest stressors in my life are the relationships that I have with my flock and with family. I pray through family too, but those are the greatest my greatest concerns.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I figure, I pray through those because that is what I see as stressing me. Obviously, if you have physical infirmity that is stressing you out, like, maybe you're battling cancer, or, you have advanced heart disease, or you're dealing with an issue physically, have an honest, direct, long-standing conversation with God about it in prayer. I think it's very healthy, very healing.
It's an important piece to the healing process.
Yes.
As you're seeking all those other things that we know are available to us, don't neglect talking to the one who's in control of our health, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really great.
That's kind of my primary. I think that on a secondary level, I think that one of the things that I do is I get away. We have, because of age and rank and all of that other stuff, at this point, I've been doing this job for 35 years. Yeah, 35 years, I think it is. So, after 35 years, I have some vacation time. And, one of the things that we try to do is we try to get away from here so that we can. And isn't this a stressor? I mean, I know you've experienced this. So I used to didn't have a lot of vacation time, so I would take 2 weeks of vacation at a time. And the reason that I would do that is usually the first 3 to 4 days on vacation, I was still so weighed down in baggage from ministry that I wasn't really focusing on church.
Yeah.
So it would take me 3 to 5 days to just unwind from everything that was going on. And then I could actually get rest. I could actually get to a place where my head was in the right spot, right? And then boom, I was good.
Yeah. We found that, Kim and I went away in January, which the travel thing is big for me too. I think that's more and more, and I don't know if that's an age thing, or if that's because we live in the dark through, for like 7 months of the year.
Yeah.
We're so far east and north that we don't get a lot of sunlight here from October through May, and so we try to get away sometime, usually around this time. We usually try to get away sometime March, April, but we went away for 2 weeks in January for our anniversary. And it was a full week of being away before I felt like I could breathe. And then we could enjoy being away on vacation for the second week. Yeah, totally. That's how we are too.
Yeah.
And it's because, I think and some of you who are in creative fields probably get this a lot too. I think everybody gets this, especially if you're a Northeasterner. Like there is stress about our world. But if you're in a creative field, it's really hard to detangle from all of the stress of your work, because your brain is so wrapped up in the creativity process. And it's not necessarily like you have a tangible thing to produce and then put a period on.
Right. You never walk away from your work.
Yeah. And so because it's so all-encompassing in life, it does follow you wherever you go. And that is a big challenge. And again, it's what fuels me and it gives me life. But it also is, it can give me too much life at times, and you have to be careful about how you manage all of that stress and how you handle all of that pressure that we get to face.
Yeah, I think another thing that I do.
Yeah,
you're talking about the travel and the getting away. I take my days off. Right? I take a day off every week. You know, God says 6 days you shall labor, and on the seventh you shall rest. And when the rest is the relaxing of what you do to survive, the living part. So my day off is Friday. I don't answer my phone on Friday. I check my voicemail messages toward the end of the day. If you've got a problem, you leave a voicemail message. There's very rarely anything that's going to go on in your life
That needs
needs me immediately. So I do that, but I also, my house is right next door to the church, so I leave.
Yeah.
Or at least I go as far as my garden. Right. So, I do have a hobby.
Yeah.
And I step out to my garden, and, I suppose if you wanted to hunt me down in my garden, I would be there and I would talk to you. But, the other thing that we do is we go away for the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that, the gardening thing, or the hobby. I have found this, again, we're related, if you didn't catch that in the intro. And so a lot of the ways that we handle stress are probably pretty similar. And the way that we, some of our issues are similar on that too, right? Like I find a lot of comfort in food. That's a challenge I have to be careful about, because food's delicious and I love it. And no one should avoid food. Like, we're designed to
eat,
right?
And lots of things.
Yeah. And eat a variety of things. You're most healthy when you eat a variety of things.
There's a reason why God made fat so tasty.
Yeah, totally. You need it. But again, because of stress, you can still overconsume. And so you just need to be careful about that. And I will overconsume when I am more stressed. But I found that finding like tangible things helps me a lot in my de-stressing. I love being outside. That's a big piece for me, and finding, the opportunity to de-stress. And so, those are all key pieces to this, that finding something that helps you, just figuring out enough about yourself to know, like, I need certain things when I am feeling burdened, and that will help. And I think for me, it's like sunshine. I just need sunshine. And like, I take vitamin D every day. It's not really enough. I need actual sunshine on my skin. And that's the thing. Like, you guys have to look at those things and try for those things and pursue that. And I think that goes hand in hand with continuing to pursue our own spiritual health and making sure our walk with the Lord is in a good place. But all of these things, and for me, I don't know if you get this too, for me, those are all also burdens. Like, when I feel stressed out about things going on, I'm like, okay, the answer then here to find some freedom or relief from this is to make sure that, all right, is my walk with the Lord okay right now? Am I getting outside? Am I doing my hobbies? Oh no, I'm making a new checklist. I hope I can satisfy this checklist. Oh my goodness, what if I'm not getting all the things done on this checklist? What if I'm not doing it? And it turns into a secondary stressor.
Yes, yeah.
Do you get that way too, or is that
absolutely. It's absolutely. And then you touched on something this week that I thought was really interesting. It's the causes of anxieties in our lives.
Yeah. I'd heard this from another thing, that anxiety comes from either not enough information or too much information.
Right.
Yeah.
So isn't that really the whole checklist thing? Is, I'm stressed, so now let me gather all of my information, and now I've got too much information.
Right. And so now here I am again.
Yeah.
It's definitely this is a thing. I think, what's this? The first step to health is acknowledging you have a problem.
Yes.
Right.
A 12-step rule.
There we go. Yeah. So,
hello, my name is.
So we have some problems here, but I do think that there's some importance in just identifying that these things are issues. And if we're talking to who I think we're talking to, right, like a number of people from our own congregation and friends and family, and people who have come across this podcast. You're thinking about stress in your life. And if you're living in the Northeast and you're living in this stress-filled world, or if you're living anywhere in our world, it feels like it's hard to avoid it. And it's important to acknowledge that you're living in a stress-filled world. In college, there was this class that every person had to take. It's called PACL.
I hated that.
Yeah, physical activity in the Christian life. Is that what that stood for?
Yeah.
I don't know. It was some kind of an acronym that we all hate. It was universally despised, this class.
Yes.
And I remember we had an assignment where we had to talk about stress and the stresses that we had in life and how we handled them. And I came in with my initial response to that assignment. The professor asked me, and I said, I don't know that I have stress. Life is good. And I got in a lot of trouble for that. Like I enjoy everything that's going on right now. I'm feeling stress-free. Like if you ask me what my current stressors are, it's the middle of the semester. I don't have any tests coming up. My relationships with my friends are great. I have good activities. I'm in a good place. What am I supposed to do? Do I invent stresses for you to then satisfy? Now I'm stressed.
Yeah, that's right.
But do you think, like at the time, like I had this mentality that I am a relatively unaffected by stress person, and that's probably not a fair personal assessment. I think that I'm a person that can be highly affected by stress, and I'm learning over time that there are certain ways that I react when I'm under stress, and it's good to just be able to have somebody in your life who can point that out for you if you're not self-aware, and then move on with the process of trying to find some restoration and healing from that. And so I guess, if you're listening to this and you're in this world, this high stress world, cultivate some friendships. I gave you a job, so now you have something to stress about. Mm-hmm. But cultivate some friendships with people and let them know, like, hey, here are some triggers for me. Like, in case I don't notice personally that I am stressed out, if you see these actions in me, would you have freedom to mention it to me? If you see this thing going on, like if you see me regressing into this pattern, or if you see me like talking about certain things or living in a certain way, or you see my schedule tighten up in a certain way, would you just bring it up in case I haven't noticed? Like that's a great friend move, right?
Right.
Like
right.
A spouse can do that. They're seeing you more closely than anybody else. But a coworker, a friend, just somebody in your small group, somebody in church, just give them the license to be able to speak into your life when you're exhibiting some of these things, and let them know that to be on the lookout for it. And that's a good first step, because then once you're aware, like, oh, I get it now. Like one of my things is I like to spend money. Like thankfully I'm married to somebody who's really careful, so we're a good balance. But when I'm under a lot of stress, I start buying stuff that I don't really need, and I have to be careful about that. But I will get into that mode of getting excited about something and then saving up for it, or trying to figure out how to save up for it. And I get into these areas, and that's when Kim can speak into it. I'm like, hey, how are you feeling? Is this why are you obsessed about this thing at the moment? Like, is this coming because? Where's this coming from, right? And then it gives me the chance to address that in my own life. I don't need that, and I won't value it once I have it. It's just that right now I am under a lot of stress, and this is a pressure release valve.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So is there a pressure release valve that is safer? All right. And so so this morning I came in a little bit late because I was going to go to the driving range. I was going to be outside and just enjoy the beautiful blue sunshine and sunshine air and the crisp New England spring air. And instead I played 9 holes on the golf course and then came in even later. But I feel better.
Good.
It was a chance to be outside.
Yeah.
It was a chance to do something. It was this check for me at the moment of you're under a lot of stress at the moment. Hit the pause button. I know that I have a list of things I need to accomplish this week.
Like doing a
podcast. Yeah. And we have a number of people being baptized on Sunday. I need to edit some videos for their testimonies. All really cool stuff I'm really excited about. But I wasn't going to be in a good place and prepared to do any of those things or address any of those things well, or be a good husband or a good father in the trajectory that I was pursuing. And I needed to hit the pause button on the things that were urgent, that needed to be done, but weren't so urgent that I couldn't take 2 hours to just breathe.
Right.
And that's a key thing I think for us to take away. Sometimes these stressors feel really urgent, but can you hit the pause button for an hour or for 2 hours and just get a chance to breathe Focus on your relationship with the Lord, with others. Go out to dinner with an old friend. Do something that just gives you a chance to take a breath and come back at this thing that's stressing you out with a fresher mind, and maybe it'll help.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, good conversation.
Yeah, we hope that this podcast gave you a fresh breath.
Yes.
And it gave you a chance to, just take a moment. Maybe you listened to it all the way through and you had an hour of just a couple guys chatting and you could just zone out and zone in and come back and forth and just something else going on to focus on for a bit. And that took you out of that world. Maybe that was a blessing to you. We hope it was. If it was, share it with a friend. Let them experience podcast as well. And we'll see you back here next week. Have a good week, everybody. Bye. You have been listening to Inside the Pastor Study podcast with Pastors George and Jeremy Stevens. Artwork by Caitlin Gallagher, music by Sam Demetrius, and engineering help from Ashley Gallagher. To find out more about us, head to marshcorner.com.